Hello and welcome to another Amati Insights call. As usual, before we start today, please do take time to review the disclaimer, which should be appearing on your screen now and is also available on our website. As always, the point is to highlight that what we're discussing today doesn't constitute investment advice. Everyone's circumstances are different. It's really essential to do your own research or to consult a professional for investment advice that's tailored to you. But with that said, welcome again. And the idea of these calls obviously is to highlight areas of investment interest that we're finding interesting opportunities. And this week we've entitled it Lab in the Loop. And the point is to discuss how AI in particular is accelerating the pace of innovation in the life sciences industry, and then how we're approaching that in the portfolio. We believe, and our research shows, that innovation in life sciences is accelerating, and there are many drivers to that, and a lot of them feed off each other, as is always the case typically with innovation. Until recently, areas that were sort of academic interest are maturing into more practical applications. So we're seeing new mechanisms of action for drugs, new classes of therapies like things called ADCs or antibody drug conjugates. You'll have heard of cell and gene therapies, no doubt. So all of those things are changing and bringing new drugs to market, as well as the tools that companies are using to identify new proteins and new structures. And these are sequencing machines are improving, imaging, analytics, all those kind of areas. And obviously, AI is a big one. And AI has really become an accelerant. You will have heard, no doubt, of Google AlphaFold, which predicts how proteins fold into 3D structures. And that has been a huge step forward in the industry. We're also seeing AI using its kind of analytical power to identify new connections between biology and patient indications and health problems. So it's generating new, more plausible molecule or drug candidates. So there's a lot going on, and AI is a driver. And in fact, even we're seeing quantum computing now being used in areas like protein folding in conjunction with AI. So some really complex areas that are being kind of investigated. And these are definitely yielding results. So there are a lot more drug launches. In fact, despite the fact that we've had COVID and we've had all this political volatility over recent years, in the last 5 years, there were more than 50% more drug launches than the 5 years before that. So we are seeing acceleration. And there are these new modalities that are coming to market, like biologic drugs and, again, cell and gene therapies. And those are growing even faster than that kind of baseline number. The other area we're seeing really interesting changes is in diagnostics. So new biomarkers are being discovered and then commercialized for quite difficult diseases like cancers, Alzheimer's disease, and even other kind of rare diseases and pediatric diseases. So it's an important area. When they're launched, these diagnostic tests typically grow very fast, rapid double-digit pace. So there are some great and interesting companies that are benefiting from that we've been reviewing. So overall, I mean, despite the kind of turmoil we've seen in the industry, the US government withholding funding and changes to the FDA, the US Food and Drug Administration, even despite that, we see that innovation is improving and there's clear signs of acceleration and R&D productivity as a result. And this is exciting for lots of reasons for us. But Mikhail, we're going to talk today about the downstream effects, right?
Yeah, and this notion of lab in the loop, it's an echo of the concept of human in the loop. When we think about the automated systems, human in the loop means that there's a human judgment somewhere in this process to kind of make sure everything is going to plan. And when we wonder what AI can do or what computer systems can do with or without human oversight, healthcare applications definitely look like one of those human in the loop places. Judgments on what to put into human body and what treatment to prescribe for a human patient definitely require a human in the loop. But that human needs to be equipped with lab systems to make this very complex determinations about biology, biochemistry, and human health. So it's not just human in the loop, it's lab in the loop. That's how the industry thinks about that. And when we think about lab in the loop, we think about the three key stages in how a healthcare idea travels through the value chain. And healthcare industry loves Latin terms, so this is Latin. But the first step is in silico, which is in the computer, in silicon chip, using computer models to assess the idea. Then it's in vitro, in glass, in the glass test tube, using analytical techniques which are not yet involving human patients, but already involving kind of wet biology. And then finally in vivo, in living objects, in real patients, clinical trials, but also diagnostics and real world data. And so if you generate more plausible hypotheses at the start of that journey, for all these good reasons that Graham you just described just a moment ago, you probably need more of that lab in the loop work downstream, and in greater quantities at higher speed. So how does that impact all the stages? Well, starting with in silico and in the computer, and this is obviously where we expect AI to be gaining a lot of ground. We mentioned AlphaFold, which predicts its protein structures as the most celebrated example of this AI success. But AI systems tend to be probabilistic. They produce something that's likely to be true, but is not guaranteed to be true. And in high stakes like human health, that's not good enough. So these systems are best when they're paired up with deterministic systems, which check this hypothesis against the hard laws of nature. Now, we've seen that framework before. We've seen an industrial design, theoretical designs, if you like, are checked against the hard laws of nature in the sort of indispensable checkpoint of simulation software. How does this machine design respond to thermal, mechanical, aerodynamical, electromagnetic impacts? And we're likely to see something similar. We're beginning to see something similar in life sciences, where deterministic biosimulation systems are brought in to check for toxicity, for effectiveness, what the industry calls PK/PD, pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, checking against the known rules how this drug behaves in patient's body and how the patient's body is likely to respond to that drug.
Yeah, and I guess beyond that, then we go into the second stage, which is in vitro, which is effectively in the test tube, and this is the first contact we have with the physical lab. So there are a number of growth drivers here that kind of are obvious when you think about it. Firstly, the volume of work is going to grow much more quickly because there are more of these plausible molecule candidates coming in. But secondly, the scope and depth of the analysis is also broadening because we're seeing quite significant advances in life sciences equipment and just techniques. So things like areas like proteomics, spatial biology. These new analytical techniques enable us to sort of see or read, if you like, the basic building blocks of life, proteins, and to analyze how they interact in their own environment, in their biological environment. In fact, at a recent laboratory industry trade show, we were talking to somebody, and they were explaining about a new technique they're using within microscopy for in situ structural biology. So effectively, they're freezing an individual cell, scraping off part of the wall of the cell to look inside to see in kind of real time, if you like, the cell machinery, the individual proteins and how they're interacting, which is something that's been very difficult and not really possible to do in the past. So an amazing new tool. And as always with these things, if you're getting better answers, you start asking more questions, and this translates into more volume of work at this in vitro stage. So we're seeing this sort of analytical work generating enormous amount of new data, which feeds back into AI, feeds back into their learning algorithms to make the AIs cleverer and more effective. And again, one of our investee companies, Bruker, recently signed an agreement with one of probably the leading foundational AI models for biology, where Bruker are using their spatial biology equipment to gather data to feed the training set of the AI. And this is a perfect example of this kind of lab in the loop flywheel, but obviously doesn't just stop at in vitro.
Yeah. I mean, again, the next step is, none of this makes sense unless it becomes validated and commercialized in humans. And there, the good old clinical trials remain an essential step. There's some nuances in mechanics of clinical trials that are changing, but from a 30,000 feet view, it feels inevitable to us that this acceleration of innovation upstream will result in an increase in number of clinical trials downstream. But beyond the clinical trials, there's also growth in something called real-world data. So monitoring the effectiveness of these medicines and the health outcomes produced in the patients after the drug is launched. And here AI helps as well. We're talking about querying very large data sets, generating insights from those data sets, and again, feeding this back into the beginning of this process to help develop next generation of innovation. So another of those positive feedback loops. The owner of the largest proprietary data set in this world, in this real world medicines data, is IQVIA, the division which used to be called IMS, which is actually one of our portfolio holdings, and also is a leading clinical trial services provider. In this kind of AI versus the world debate, IQVIA CEO made a very spirited and I think really convincing case how in the age of AI, their real world data business is becoming more valuable rather than threatened. And the other in vivo lab in the loop opportunity we should mention is diagnostics. So again, we're seeing accelerated innovation and tests, these new tests that, as Graham mentioned earlier at the beginning of our talk, which are really making a difference in the clinic. But again, we're seeing this feedback loop and flywheel effect. So more diagnostics means more data, and triangulating this data with the health information of the patient feeds back to the algorithm to make the diagnostics more effective. One of our portfolio holdings companies, diagnostics company called ChinDX, believes that this combination, this data set of, in that case, genetic testing and the data about the patients and their lineage is their main competitive advantage, their main mode. So lots of interesting stuff going on in vivo as well.
Yes. So, I mean, a lot of sort of positive structural dynamics through those three areas as we talked about. Although a lot of them have been obscured temporarily, we think, by quite noisy factors like COVID drove some overinvestment in areas of life sciences, equipment spending, inventory, and it took some time to digest all of that capacity, which has suppressed growth in recent years and has kind of weighed on the sector. Likewise, the Trump administration has had some pretty aggressive sort of funding reviews over the last couple of years, or a year and a half or so. And they've cut funding to the National Institutes of Health and to a number of universities. And that's, again, created a bit of an overhang. And then, I mean, lastly, obviously, all of the tariff uncertainty and the drug pricing disruptions. So there's been a lot that's been thrown at the industry that investors have had to deal with that we feel is these are temporary disruptions or transitory issues, if you like. And they've just been masking this underlying structural growth that we're seeing that we've talked about. So for us, that's a really interesting setup from an investment standpoint. We like situations where those structural shifts are being temporarily masked. I guess the main debate really for the market has been who is going to benefit from the rise of AI and which existing business models are kind of defensible against that disruptive threat. And we do think this lab in the loop space, where that whole value chain we talked about, in silico all the way to in vivo, will really benefit from AI idea generation and kind of more and more better, more targeted molecules coming into that structure, into that process. So from an investment portfolio standpoint, what does it mean, Mikhail? What are we doing here?
We're doing a lot. I mean, those of you who know our approach, that we have this, we'll call them innovation frontiers portfolio themes, but a number of our portfolio themes align to this kind of lab in the loop framework that we've been describing. We own Bruker, which is, in our opinion, the best portfolio of in vitro research tools. We own Danaher, which is a great portfolio of both in vitro research but also in vivo diagnostics. I mentioned IQVIA, which is the leading clinical trials and the data provider for the in vivo stage of that journey. A lot of the diagnostics innovation ends up in LabCorp, which is the kind of the largest general purpose diagnostics test company, but also a couple of more specialist niche diagnostics companies like HU Group or GeneDx, which focus on Alzheimer's or rare pediatric diseases, respectively. And the volume of work, the need to automate and streamline, build these high throughput systems means the healthcare robotics is emerging as a really interesting innovation frontier, enabling all this flywheel to spin. And we recently added to the portfolio a Swiss company called Tacan, which makes healthcare robotics that automates many of the stages of this lab in the loop work. And if you add it together, I mean, it is probably, if not the largest, certainly one of the largest exposures in our portfolio. So we're definitely invested in this lab in the loop flywheel. and we actually have really positive outlook on that once you look through the short-term disruptions that obscure this underlying picture. So lots to look out for, lots to expect. We've been keeping you posted on the developments, and again, thank you very much for dialing in, and we'll see you again. We'll speak to you again in 2 weeks' time.